Hey everybody, if you're in the States, I hope you're enjoying your day off. And if you're not in the States, well, happy Friday. I came across an article today that kind of made me chuckle. The headline says that the Nintendo president says fan who can't afford the Nintendo Switch 2 should engage with Nintendo characters elsewhere. And while I would absolutely love to take that headline and run with it, I figured it was probably exaggerated a little bit. Sure enough, when I went through the article, I found the source and decided to go straight to that. And it comes back to the general shareholders meeting that occurred last week. Now, I think I briefly touched up on the shareholders meeting last week when we were discussing the game key cards. And I don't know if I missed the Q&A portion that pops up, or maybe it was uploaded a few days later because it needs to get translated. Not sure. I remember seeing headlines about some of these questions, but I do not remember seeing this PDF, and that could have just been me missing it. So I decided to read through it because this kind of stuff is very entertaining to me, and I think I found some relevant bits of information that are worth sharing with you lovely people. Especially because I think there was at least one, maybe two moments where I was kind of like, okay, I think we're getting something here. Some kind of tangible feedback about the events leading up to the launch as well as the post-launch. Because remember, a lot of people just assumed that everything leading up to the launch was just white noise and that it was a very small bubble on the internet. But I think that there are clear proofs that despite the fact that there were early sales for the Nintendo Switch 2, there is still a lot that Nintendo has to do in order to ensure that the Switch 2 continues to be sold. And they're very much aware of what's going on, what the discourse is online, despite what many people would want you to think. Because the idea, right, is that we are all just talking in our own little echo chambers, and Nintendo Switch 2 is the best-selling console of all time, and it's going to continue to be so, and Nintendo doesn't care about what any of us are saying. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go through this. So this whole Q&A section goes over roughly 18 questions. I might skim past some of them, and other ones I might put a little bit more effort in. It just depends on what's worth talking about. So Furukawa was asked about the visual content business, basically upcoming films and alternative forms of media in which that Nintendo's IP can get into people's homes. How to get them in front of screens for children to fall in love with Nintendo's IP. And it's just typical answers. He's talking about how great the Mario Bros. Movie did and how they have another sequel coming up, as well as a Zelda movie beyond that. And he's saying that they're being very proactive on this, but they also can't discuss any plans beyond the Zelda movie at this time. But they are working on various other projects. The next question is about the value of Nintendo's IP through music, and if they would consider making live events. And this one kind of made me laugh because you guys know how I feel about all these different apps. Furukawa basically made a whole advertisement for the Nintendo Music app, and how they consider their game music to be a very valuable and important form of Nintendo IP. But the app is more than just a music app. It allows users to listen to the music while viewing relevant game images. And it also has unique features like curated playlists based on the various themes, such as game titles, characters, and battle music. Just put it on Spotify and let YouTubers put your music on there like normal people. This is just... You know what? No, I'm not doing the music one. This should be on Spotify, it should be on YouTube. I don't feel like going on a whole tirade about why. This just feels like when one of those regular networking broadcasting channels decide to make an app for no reason. Well, actually, no. The reason is so that they can get your data when you download it and make money off of that. But yeah, I'm moving on from this one. In the third question, he was asked about the supply of the Switch 2 and that it's not meeting demand, especially in Japan. Is this due to insufficient production volume or was the demand forecast inaccurate? And this is just typical answer saying that the demand exceeded their expectation and they're sorry and they're trying their best to get more Switch 2s out to the public. Next question is about company culture. We can skip that. Another one about the location of the annual shareholders meeting. Another one about the drawings and how they required Nintendo accounts for it. One about Nintendo IP for education. And in that case, they're just basically like, we have nothing to announce at this time, but we're always researching opportunities. There's another question about accessibility, more generic shareholder questions and answers, nothing too major. Oh, here's a good one. How long does the company expect the business lifecycle of the Nintendo Switch 2 to be? So, Furukawa says the Switch 2 just launched, so it's not yet time to discuss its lifecycle. But they plan on making it as long as possible, just like the Switch 1. And then he reiterated that the Nintendo Switch 2 is backwards compatible with the Switch 1, and they are still developing new titles for the Nintendo Switch. So there's going to be opportunities for consumers to experience Nintendo Switch titles for the first time on the Nintendo Switch 2. This isn't anything newsworthy, I think. Many of us already understood this going into it, but it's nice to hear him just reiterate it. This is very clearly a sign that this is going to be a dual console generation. The previous Switch is still going to be very important, and seemingly is going to continue to receive support for as long as possible, and they have no intention of ending that generation. So naturally, that's why we're seeing the OG Nintendo Switch prices go up in various regions, and likewise not going down in other regions. It's why we're seeing that they're still going to be making games for the Nintendo Switch despite the fact that they've supposedly moved on to the Nintendo Switch 2. And it's why you can still purchase the Nintendo Switch directly from Nintendo or at all major retailers, and you will likely be able to continue to do so for a very long time because Switch 1 consoles, accessories, all of that stuff is still very much relevant to the Nintendo Switch 2 lifecycle. The Switch 2 will get some exclusives, but there is seemingly no intention on slowing anything down with the Nintendo Switch 1. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how many more people are buying games for the Switch 1 when they end up having dual releases. Because naturally, it's got a significantly larger user base, and there's a very good chance it's going to continue to remain that way for quite a while. Because Nintendo is using the Switch 2 to clearly extend the life cycle of the Switch 1 to continue to charge full price to games that are over 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 years old. Again, we all already knew this pretty much, but it's a very clear intention on their end. And honestly, I think I would actually have been okay with this if they just called it like it was. They should have just called it the Nintendo Switch Pro and made their intentions very clear from the get-go. Although, maybe the intentions have nothing to do with it, because from the beginning, Doug Bowser said if you can't afford a Switch 2, go buy the Switch 1. And then Nintendo proceeded to increase the price of the Switch 1 in various regions, so they might not be able to afford that either. And then the next question, that's where some of the controversy started coming in. The Switch 2 has a higher price point than past platforms. I am concerned that this might reduce opportunities for young children to engage with it. How will you address this issue? Furukawa says they believe the pricing of the Switch 2 is appropriate for the gaming experience it offers. It is true that the Switch 2 has a higher price point than our past gaming systems, and we're creating various opportunities outside of our gaming systems for young children to engage with Nintendo characters and game worlds, with one of the ultimate goals being that they will eventually play on our gaming system. That's what led to the crazy caption. The Nintendo president says fans who can't afford a Switch 2 should engage with Nintendo characters elsewhere. You know, when you put it like that, it sounds a lot worse, but that is kind of what he's saying. He's saying we realize our Switch 2 is very expensive, and we're hoping that using the movies and the theme parks and whatnot, or even the more affordable Switch 1, people will get sucked into our IPs and then decide that it's time for them to spend money on the Switch 2. When you look at it in the context of what he's saying that is actually what he's implying. And it's the same thing that Doug Bowser was implying before. Through other ways of being able to get sucked into Nintendo's IP, we're hoping that people realize that it's worth spending extra money on the Switch 2 because they like our IPs. He also mentioned that they incorporated various features into the Nintendo Switch 2, but that was kind of like a quick bullet point that he mentioned. He was a lot more about that Disney route, that route of like, yeah, we're trying to get people sucked in through movies and games and just get pulled into the whole idea where they believe that it's worth it for them to overspend on something that is not worth this much. The value of Nintendo is in their IP, in the characters, not in what you're actually getting from it. It's not tangible, it's about how you feel about these things. Which is valuable, don't get me wrong, but it's only valuable to the extent of which it is worth it. And I think it's clear based off of how big of a backlash the price has gotten that it's not quite worth it to many people anymore. And he closes that answer off with a very important line, something that I think many people need to hear. They are closely monitoring to what degree the price of the system might become a barrier. Let me say that again. They are closely monitoring to what degree the price of the system might become a barrier. They know that people don't like the increase in price. They're very much aware that they could have sold significantly more Switch 2s and sold them at an even faster rate than they did if the price was set correctly. The same way that it just blew through everything in Japan, because over there it was set correctly. Right now it looks good for them. They got the hype chasers, they got the early adopters, they got the scalpers, but they're aware of that. These are smart people. They're not just casuals who are like, oh, they sold 3.5 million in the first weekend. How could everybody still hate this thing? They are still very much aware that the first 4 days of sales ultimately mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. The Switch 2, at worst, if it was like absolutely hated by the entire world, was still gonna hit 15 to 20 million sales. The Wii U managed 10 million, and that was with a smaller market. Heck, I would say based off of the growth of the gaming industry, 30 million sales minimum, even if it was like despised by a majority of the community. So the first 5 million sales don't really mean too much to them, in the sense that they know that there is still a very big possibility that the price matters. The prices of the games matter, and they are closely monitoring it. And he is vocalizing that to the shareholders. Shareholders, by the way, that are also concerned about the price of the Switch 2. And I want to stress that because I know there are a lot of people out there right now who are thinking, whatever, the boycott didn't work and I want to just get a Switch 2 already, forget about it. Now look, you have every right to get a Switch 2. I have no doubt that if anybody buys a Switch 2 right now, they'll have a lot of fun with it. But if you're somebody that believes in a pushback, believes in a protest against the prices that are going up in the gaming industry altogether, let alone Nintendo, the fight is still very much not over yet. And even if the 1 month sales come back and it's like 5.5 million, 6 million, 7 million. These are very, very early days driven by hype. There is still plenty out there to keep you well occupied until the Nintendo Switch 2 has a better library. For me, Donkey Kong looks great, but it's not $580 great. Or I guess $530 if you don't get the Mario Kart World bundle. But you know, in a year or two from now, if Nintendo ends up just selling like crazy and makes a ton of games, you can always buy a Switch 2 then at that point anyway. The point is that right now the fight, the boycott, the pushback, all of that stuff is still not done, and Nintendo is definitely taking a notice of this. Not necessarily all the videos on YouTube, I don't think they're watching it, but they're watching the sales numbers and they're trying to see how things are getting sold, who's using game key cards and who isn't, who's buying Switch 1 versions, who's buying third parties on different platforms, who's paying for upgrade packs, who's paying for Switch 2 editions, all of that stuff. I would actually go a step further, and this is not something that I'm going to recommend you do necessarily, but I stopped spending any money on Nintendo stuff at this point. In fairness, I stopped a while ago, but we had a family plan that just finally expired, and I just opted to not renew it. I think my family is probably going to renew it, so they're still going to get that money, but I'm not part of the plan anymore. So I'm doing what I can. Beyond that, there were a few more questions in regards to how they plan on getting their IP out there, and most of them just basically pointed back to, we're looking for different ways to get people to learn about our IP and ultimately buy the Nintendo Switch 2. We want them to develop lifelong relationships with our IPs, again, weaponizing nostalgia, all that stuff. After that is the one question that I actually did get a hold of last time when this popped up, and it was about the game key cards. We kind of discussed this already. Furukawa claims that the game key cards are great because the Switch 2 has a lot of memory, so it just makes it easier to download stuff on there. The shareholder themselves was actually concerned that the publishers will find that their games are not selling well on game key cards because many people find this whole idea of an empty cartridge to be very unappealing. And, you know, he didn't really address the concerns. He just reiterated what a game key card was and said the Switch 2 has a lot more memory available so that they can download larger games. Next, they get asked a question about the improved performance of the Nintendo Switch 2 leading to higher game development costs, which in turn could result in higher software prices and ultimately a decrease in the gaming population. What measures are you considering to address this? Again, this is more shareholder concern about price increases, not just for hardware, but software as well. And it's funny because depending on how you read Furukawa's answer, you can totally make rage bait out of it. Basically, he says that they're very efficient in the way that they develop these games. And if you wanted to rage bait, you could be like, well, of course they do. They use the same map in Mario Kart World as they did in Zelda, and they keep reusing the same assets, and Donkey Kong Bonanza looks like the same thing from Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Mario Odyssey, and every game just looks the same as the one before it, and that's how they give people the sense of novelty, even though it really isn't. I don't know. I think that's fine. It just would be nice if you kept the prices at a respectable price point instead of jumping Mario Kart up to $80, making $70 the standard price for everything else. And that's pretty much it. The final question is about the intended use for land that was acquired next to the headquarters, which gives me really nothing spectacular to talk about anyway. But yeah, my big takeaway from this thing is that Nintendo is very much still listening. And I think anybody with any sense would know that Nintendo is being very cautious about this. They're releasing the type of press statements they need to release. They're giving their fans a sense of accomplishment and a sense of confidence by mentioning how many sales occurred over whatever window they need to occur in, frequently coming in and talking about how out of stock they are, even though stock continues to flow out. They're very much trying to set a narrative in that they don't care and that you should be happy and you should want to be part of this, and this is a very big deal. But when you read through the conversation in this shareholders meeting, aside from Furukawa making statements that he has to make, because you can't go into the shareholders meeting and be like, guys, everything is screwed up, I don't know what to do anymore. He's obviously saying the stuff that he needs to say in order to reassure them that they're good. But there is clearly a tone between both him and the shareholders that there is something large going on with the Switch 2, with the backlash that the Switch 2 has released, with all of the price increases, with the game keycard stuff. They didn't really discuss the terms of services because I think that's beyond many of these people. So all of that stuff that we are all very frustrated about is a very real concern for them, and it's something that they're watching. And remember, this meeting occurs after all of the records that were broken on opening weekend and after the continuous sales that occurred over the next few weeks, because they know that that's still very early, and they know that there are still millions of people out there that have yet to adopt the Switch 2, and it's because of all of these anti-customer acts. So we're getting somewhere. The hope is that it just continues to get there. But with that, I think I'm out. About to head over to a barbecue, maybe kayak a little bit. If you got lovely weather where you are, I hope you enjoy your Friday, you enjoy your weekend, and thank you so much for listening. I will catch you on the next one.